There's a reason manifestation feels fake to so many people. And it's not because they're doing it wrong. It's because their picture of reality doesn't support it. If you're trying to visualize your way to a different life while still unconsciously believing that reality is made of atoms bouncing around in empty space, there will always be a gap, a subtle feeling that you're pretending. You can push through that feeling. You can override it with willpower. But it will keep coming back because it's not a psychological problem. It's an ontological one. Ontology just means your deep assumptions about what reality is, what it's made of, how it works at the most fundamental level. And most people have inherited a materialist ontology without ever choosing it. That's worth pausing on. Nobody sat you down and said, "Here is the philosophy of materialism. Matter is primary. Consciousness is a byproduct of the brain. The external world is the real world, and your inner experience is a biological hallucination." Nobody asked you to sign up for that. But it's in the water. It's in how we talk about the world. It's embedded in the language, the education system, the default assumptions of nearly every institution we pass through. And it produces a specific orientation toward manifestation. If the material world is the real one, then thoughts are just noise. Imagination is just fantasy. Feeling is just a subjective experience with no creative power. In that framework, manifestation is basically magic. And you can't really believe in magic while pretending to be a rational person. So the practice stays shallow. You go through the motions, but part of you never quite lands. That internal division is what makes it feel fake. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because your framework doesn't have a place for what you're trying to do. Now here's what's interesting. There are other ontologies. Serious, philosophically rigorous worldviews in which consciousness is not a byproduct of matter, but the ground of reality itself. In philosophical idealism, which has a long tradition in both Western and Eastern thought, the fundamental nature of reality is mind-like. Experience is not generated by brains. Brains appear within experience. This is not fringe thinking. Thinkers from Plato to Schopenhauer to Kastrup have articulated this in different ways. The nondual traditions of Advaita Vedanta, Dzogchen, and Kashmir Shaivism point to something very similar. Reality is not a collection of dead objects. It is a living field of awareness, and the visible world is its expression. When you actually internalize that, something shifts. Manifestation stops feeling like you're trying to mentally push the physical world around, because you're no longer assuming that the physical world is primary and your mind is secondary. Instead, you begin to see imagination as something more real, not less. Not as daydreaming, but as contact with a subtler, more interior layer of reality. A layer that is, in this framework, actually more causally upstream than the visible surface. This is exactly what Neville Goddard was pointing to when he said that consciousness is the only reality. He wasn't being poetic. He was being ontological. And this is where most manifestation content falls short. It gives you techniques. Visualize. Affirm. Feel the wish fulfilled. But it doesn't explain the deeper picture that would make those techniques make sense. Without the ontological shift, techniques are just rituals. You're acting as if consciousness creates, while deep down still believing that matter is what's really real. And you can feel that split. That's the fakeness. That's the gap. The fix is not to try harder. It's not to be more disciplined about your mental diet. Those things have their place, but they don't address the root issue. The root issue is that your map of reality needs updating. When consciousness is understood as primary, assumption is no longer pretending. It's alignment. You're not making something up. You're selecting which layer of reality to inhabit. When imagination is understood as contact with a deeper dimension, visualization is not escapism. It's participation. You're engaging with the inward source of experience. When identity is understood as a state of consciousness rather than a fixed biological fact, changing your self-concept is not delusion. It's reorientation. You're stepping into a different way of being within the field. All of this flows naturally once the foundational picture shifts. And here's the practical consequence. Once your ontology changes, you stop fighting yourself. The technique and the understanding come into alignment. The inner division that made everything feel forced starts to dissolve. You can still visualize. You can still affirm. You can still feel the wish fulfilled. But now, it doesn't feel like a trick. It feels like a lawful expression of how reality actually works. That's the shift I am interested in. Not manifestation as a hack layered on top of a materialist worldview, but manifestation as a natural consequence of understanding what reality is. If you approach it that way, you'll notice something else. The need to force outcomes starts to relax. There's less anxiety, less grasping, less of the desperate energy that actually undermines the whole process. Because you're no longer a tiny mind trying to manipulate a vast external world. Your consciousness moving within itself. That doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become coherent. Your assumptions and your understanding start pointing in the same direction. And when they do, experience tends to follow. This is what I keep coming back to. Manifestation is not fundamentally a technique. It's a consequence of understanding. Get the understanding right, and the practice becomes almost self-evident. So if manifestation has been feeling fake to you, don't blame yourself. And don't just try harder. Look at your ontology. Look at what you actually believe reality is. That's where the real shift happens. If this resonated, I'll be going deeper into this in future videos. I'm exploring Neville, non-duality, idealism, and what happens when you ground manifestation in a consciousness-first understanding of reality.